Hello and welcome to the TelecomTV Summit on the Cloud Native Telco. I'm Guy Daniels, Director of Content, and coming up now is our roundtable discussion on removing the barriers to cloud native operations within telcos. Now, telcos continue to face challenges in adopting and operating a cloud native environment as they start to re-architect their companies, cultures and teams. But how can they accelerate this work and achieve the benefits of cloud native? What barriers remain and how can they be removed? Well, let's find out what our guests think, and I'm delighted to introduce Mattias Fridström, who is Chief Evangelist for Telia Carrier, Hines, Technology Strategist, Communications Technology Group at Hewlett Packard Enterprise, Beth Cohen, SDN Product Strategies for Verizon, and Ferland, Vice President and General Manager, Edge Computing and Communication Service Providers at Lenovo. Well, hello everyone, very good to see you all. Thank you so much for taking part in the roundtable. Let's begin, because this is the first roundtable of this year's summit. So let's be very, very clear from the outset here. What are the biggest benefits of a telco cloud native environment? Charles, why are we doing this?
Thank you for the question. I think the point is to be more agile, to become more flexible so that we're able to produce services and deliver better services at the right time. And I think that the cloud native environment really gives more agility and flexibility to adjust the capacity and adjust the services where and when they are needed. Ultimately, that's probably one of the most important goals that we're chasing.
Yeah, thank you, Charles. And this is the third year of the Cloud Native Telco Summit. And here we are still talking about barriers to cloud native. So what are these barriers and where are they? Are they within the telcos? Are they with the technology? Are they with the developer community? Mattias, what thoughts have you got on where these barriers are?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good question. And I think, the technology is actually there now. And I feel most of the things are actually there now. So we as a telco right now are prepared to start to do this. I think we have overcome some of the problems we've had in terms of the number of people we had that knows this. We've hired a number of people. I think the biggest struggle we have right now is actually now on the legal side, where some of the legal people are starting to question about, can you put really everything in the cloud? What about all these rules? Where are the clouds located? That type of stuff that we thought we had solved that, and we thought the world was agreed on that you can store some type of data in data centers really everywhere, and some data needs to be stored very locally. That's popped up as one of the new things that we are struggling with right now at the moment. But from the rest of the barriers, the biggest barrier is still the competence in our company. We need even more competent people of doing this, because we've really, as Charles said, understood that we don't need the servers in our basement anymore. We should have everything in the cloud. As much as you can have in the cloud should be in the cloud. But I would say legal barriers, security barriers, that's popped up recently. And yeah, we need to overcome that as well. We will do that. But that's just what we struggle with right now at the moment.
Thanks, Mattias. Interesting observation there about the legal barriers. Beth, what thoughts have you got on what these barriers are and where they are?
Well, so I want to build on some of Mattias's thoughts, which is legal barriers. We're seeing this, political legal barriers as well. I mean, there's the Great Firewall of China. We can continue having issues with that. And another thing that our regulatory group has brought up is responsibility. So who owns what? Particularly if we put our cloud, our applications in hyperscalers. Traditionally, of course, the telcos have owned the data centers and they've owned the spaces, and our legal teams are not 100% comfortable with the idea that there's a third party that has some responsibility for maintaining that infrastructure, which potentially will have problems with, if there's a problem, who's responsible for fixing it? How do we fix it? And are there any monetary remunerations related to that. So it gets very complicated very quickly.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Beth. Charles, it appears from what Mattias and Beth have been saying that we're maturing in a way, that these barriers aren't the obvious ones, aren't the technology barriers. We're not even talking cultural barriers yet. We're talking areas of responsibility, legal. Do you see the same sorts of barriers?
Well, I do acknowledge the same views that they shared, of course. But we have to celebrate as well some of the technology advancement that we've made in this space. A lot of this cloud technology was initially built for IT organization. So there's a lot of work that went into the last few years in optimizing the data plane or optimizing how the cloud application performed to meet some of the telco requirements. That combined with the hardware acceleration that came with it really gave us a telco spin to what was otherwise mainly IT technology. So I think we've made great progress on this front. What I believe is really key for the next the large scale deployment is really the orchestration of this all, right? Just like most of the orchestration were designed for IT environment, now we need to consider how can in a telco environment we deploy and orchestrate these resources in the most efficient way without overrunning resources and always having their same capacity and available capacity and not run out of capacity at some point. So I think the orchestration is probably the next big challenge that we're facing. While we achieved a lot on the hardware acceleration, and when we look at making the cloud native application a lot more telco friendly than their otherwise IT initial roots.
Thank you, Charles. Well, given the barriers we've just identified, the next obvious question is, how do we go about removing them? And there seems to be a wide range of barriers. So there's obviously not one solution to remove all of those. It's all going to depend on the particular obstacles and barriers themselves. But if they don't disappear themselves, and barriers rarely disappear themselves, how do we go about removing them? Beth, how do we become more proactive as telcos to advance?
Well, I think that we need to look at barriers. There's different types of barriers that we've been talking about. There's technology barriers. There's legal and regulatory barriers, which of course telcos are very sensitive to, and data barriers. And fundamentally, let me talk a little bit about the technology barriers. As Lee mentioned, cloud and cloud native, particularly containers, really came about by IT departments that were building applications that were web-based type applications, which of course are completely different from what telco applications are like. Some are obviously web-based, but the majority are keeping track of cell phone service sessions and network functions, all of which the cloud native, the founders and the people who originally created cloud native didn't really think about. And absolutely, over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of work around addressing those issues, particularly within the CNCF community. There's a telco working group. The Anakit project which has been running out of the LFN, has been working on this for the last 2 years and has developed a whole set of reference architectures and reference models that support cloud native specifically for the telco industry. So I think the way to address it is, take advantage and leverage open source projects, create new open source projects. We just kicked off one on network intelligent networks, which is another issue that is not going to be solved by any one vendor or any one telco. So these are solutions that need to come from the community, and so that I think is where we need to start.
Thank you, Beth. And Mattias, have you got any thoughts about how we go about removing these barriers?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in some way, Beth talked about the technology barriers, and I agree with her. I think on the more operational side, or as the legal side, as I talked about, I think what we right now have to do is we have to explain to our legal experts what it actually means to have the data in the cloud and what type of data we're going to store in the cloud to sort of calm them down and get them to understand that some data should absolutely be in the cloud. Some data we need to be very careful about, and then telecoms knows everything about storing of that type of data. But I think more education, and this type of education we didn't really believe we needed. We thought, it's all about educating the engineers on how clouds are running. Now we need to take another approach of educating some other people in our company to convince them that this is the right way to go, and they should sleep well at nights and not be afraid of that we're breaching data laws in any country we're operating in. So that type of education is very important right now.
Thank you, Mattias. So next question is, whose responsibility should it be to remove these barriers? Who actually makes the running? Who leads the way on the cloud native telco? Is it the telcos themselves? Is it the vendor partners? Is it the developers? Who is it? And also within telcos, who within the management structure is going to take responsibility for making all this happen and push this along? Lee, do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, what we're really seeing in a lot of different type of venues is the instantiation of a transformation office, which is responsible for moving across all of the different types of organizational boundaries to affect what we've already been discussing, which is the cultural change, the overall programmatic change, even up to and including the legal type of changes that are associated with the transformation towards a cloud native type of technique. This is not a single step type of approach, one in which we have to have a significant amount of collaboration between different types of departments as they begin to undertake a development operations type of a compendium, if you will, towards adopting cloud native types of techniques. So responsibilities are carried across the entirety of the organization, but this is the type of transformation that we've seen in the past, one in which we move towards IMS type of environments, one in which we move towards LTE type of environments. It is something that we recognize that we need to move forward as an industry, one in which the cloud native adoption is a rapidly forming type of technique that these transformation offices ultimately are responsible for achieving.
Thanks, Lee. Beth, thoughts from yourself about who takes responsibility to make all this happen?
So I think it really needs to be a joint responsibility between the telcos and the vendors. The vendors, and I think the telcos need to take a lead on it to drive it. Obviously, the benefits to the telco is great. More efficiency, more flexibility, all of those good things. But we typically don't have the interest or expertise in developing these applications. So we really need to rely on the vendors to do that. And again, as I mentioned earlier, driving towards standards is also very important. I know ORAN is been an ONAP or two projects that have been very successful so far in where telcos and the vendors are sharing the requirements and making sure to develop and deliver services that the telcos can actually purchase and deploy into their networks. So that's where the responsibility is. And of course, tying into the other conversation around regulatory, I don't have to tell you that many governments are just still pretty clueless about the regulatory ramifications of this. So I think again, our legal teams need to be careful to make sure that we don't cross over into unknown territory.
So we've identified barriers, we've discussed how to remove them, but we've got to do more. We have to move faster. So how do we accelerate the adoption of cloud native within telcos? How do the telcos ensure that they're not continuously playing catch up or risk falling even further behind? Charles?
Yeah, thank you. With every new technology, I think it's important to have a phased approach. This is a cutting new technology, bleeding edge technology that we're introducing into a live massive network infrastructure. What really works best in our experience is having some smaller self-contained projects. Not trying to boil the ocean at once, but really identify an area that is self-contained, that will not disrupt the core business. For example, an edge project where we can target a type of a edge deployment where we'll have cloud native applications running in that space. What is also important to realize is that there's a lot of know-how in the vendors and a lot of know-how in the telcos, but we typically have a procurement or supplier vendor type of relationship, which works great in the procurement phase, but not always great in innovation and not always the most efficient when we're trying to bring new technology. So what I've seen work pretty well in the case of Lenovo working with telcos around the world is creating these joint innovation program where we set ourselves a clear goal and an objective, and we both put the resources that are subject matter expert in the respective area. So defining the real use cases with clear objectives and having expertise from vendor side that is able to accelerate how we implement those technology and meet these objectives. So that's really what I would recommend to accelerate, is to have this open mind partnership between vendors and the community to accelerate how we can implement new technology like cloud native by leveraging the skills of each one.
Thanks, Charles. So we've got the joint innovation approach between telcos and vendors. Mattias, any other ways we can accelerate the introduction of cloud native and remove these barriers?
Yeah, no, you know I'm a big fan of doing stuff our own. I think telcos knows exactly what telcos need, but this is one of the areas where I actually think we need some support from the other parts of the industry. And if we want to move these things much faster than we can educate our people and move this is one area where I actually feel we should bring in technology partners to help us. It needs still to be run by telcos, as Beth said. It's important that we know what we're doing and that we know what's happening. But here I can actually see that we should bring in more people from the outside to do this faster. We know what we want to achieve, and we need more hands and feet to do this. So I think it's a perfect opportunity to bring in some experts from the outside.
Thank you, Mattias. Which leads me on to something that Beth, you brought up earlier, and that's the role of hyperscalers. What role do hyperscalers play in all this lot? We're seeing relationships. We're seeing a relationship between Verizon, for example, and one of the hyperscalers. So how will this all end up? Who's going to end up hosting and managing and running these cloud platforms?
Well, it's two hyperscalers now. We now have relationships with AWS and Amazon AWS, as well as Microsoft Azure, and that's so that's an interesting question, because the hyperscalers their data centers are in useful places, and so certainly. I would say what I've seen from the industry is that the telcos have flirted with putting in, moving some of their applications into the hyperscalers. But at the same time, they have put applications in. They've also been taking them out because there's a cost factor. Obviously, telcos use massive amounts of infrastructure. And, it's really questionable whether the hyperscalers can be as efficient or equally efficient. I should say the hyperscalers are probably equally efficient at, building data centers as the telcos, because, we're at similar scale. And of course, the hyperscalers, the added profit margin. So there's some profit stacking. I would say in the end, and this is my personal opinion, it's going to be some mix of telco-owned and telco-owned systems, and as well as systems in the hyperscalers.
Okay, thank you very much, Beth. Well, honest assessment time then. How are we as telcos, how are we doing? How do we think telcos are doing in the move to embracing cloud native? Are we making the right cloud native moves? Are we moving fast enough? And are we bringing the whole company, the whole infrastructure of our organizations along with us and not just operating within internal silos? Mattias, perhaps I could maybe start with you on this one and open it up to all our guests.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, we're in a unique position right now. As you know, we've been sold 1st of June from Telia company, and therefore we absolutely have to remove all our applications from the servers that are in-house by Telia. And I think we have something like 12 months to do this. So for us, we have to go cloud. We have to practically move everything. I think the target right now is to have 90% of our applications in the cloud by next summer. So we have to speed up. We have to do this right. We have to do this carefully. Are we there yet? No, not at all. And as I said in the beginning, some of the legal aspects need to be sorted out first. So I would say we do have some systems in there. We have identified a few systems that shouldn't be in the cloud, that won't scale in the cloud. So we can keep them on some servers in our future basement. But most of the things should go to the cloud. I think we have a path to the cloud right now, but we need to hurry up because time is running. If we have 30% right now, that would be perfect, but we need to go much higher.
Well, that is quite some incentive you've got to make this transformation. Best of luck with that. Lee, honest assessment from yourself, and how do you think we're doing as an industry in the embracing telco cloud native?
Well, look, I've certainly seen all of the generations, right? 1G all the way up through 5G. And we are in a very, very aggressive, accelerated move. The telecoms themselves are not moving slowly. They are adopting, as Beth indicated, more of a hyperscaler technique to address the type of use cases that are being sought after within the industry itself. For sure, there's a skills gap, but take a look at it from the opposite angle. What if you were still having to train engineers out of college in the elements and practices of Signal System 7? Can you imagine the type of delay that you would have in the industry towards the type of aggressive use cases that we're going after? No, it's in fact the opposite in the industry today. I know that it seems as if we're moving slowly as an industry, but we actually aren't. We're moving at a very, very aggressive pace, one that's responsible, one that keeps the network up and running and alive, and one that achieves the ultimate goals of establishing these rapid type of communication use cases that we've all been dreaming about for the past few years. So I think that we're doing actually quite well. We need to address the skills gap. We need to address the legal gap. But we're not talking about anti-gravity here. We're achieving the objectives that we've set out for.
Excellent. Thank you, Lee. And we mustn't ever underestimate the size of this transformation journey and what's at stake and what it entails. Charles, what about yourself? Let's have an honest assessment from yourself as to where you think the industry is in terms of its shift to cloud native.
I agree with my colleagues here. I think we're moving pretty fast. It might seem slow. However, this is a complex and a very large-scale project. I think that NFV, in 2012, 2013, sort of made a big change in our industry and opened up the mind to change the way of how we're delivering services and appliances to the market. And we only have to look at the collaboration that's happening in organizations like ORAN, for example, and in a matter of a few years, few months, they really came out with a full architecture to deploy an open RAN environment. This is really an astonishing accomplishment that happened over a very short period of time, and that with the contribution, active participation, I should say, about the telcos and the vendors all working together towards that common goal. So now we still have a lot of things to do in the future and how to implement this in a large scale. However, what we have accomplished is already quite phenomenal in a very short amount of time. So I agree that it might seem slow, but we're making very fast progress towards moving our telco environments towards a cloud native organization.
Thank you, Charles. And Beth, time for a situation report from yourself. What's your sit rep on the status of the cloud native telco?
I would agree that we are moving at breakneck speed, although it can be frustratingly slow at the same time. And I know nobody's mentioned it here until now, but But I still find that our operational teams are behind the eight ball. They're still struggling with the speed and pace of change of the technology and the operational management of these cloud native applications and cloud native architectures is just still a struggle for them. And they have started making changes into their systems to support them, and I'm very excited. I've started working with some of the AI, ML, and intelligent networking applications that I think will help. But that's just really starting. Yeah, we have a ways to go, but we are definitely moving in the right direction.
Good to hear. Thanks, Beth. Well, we will be delving deeper into a number of key areas of the Cloud Native Telco during this summit. But for now, we have to draw this discussion about the barriers to Cloud Native adoption to a close. Thank you all very much for participating and sharing your views today. Now, if you're watching this on day one of our TelecomTV Summit on the Cloud Native Telco, then don't forget to send us any questions you have on this subject, and we'll try and answer them in our live after show program later today. And do take part in our online poll. You can find it below this video player window next to the Q&A app. All of today's programs are available to view online here at TelecomTV, and we'll be back tomorrow with more roundtable discussions for you. Until then, thank you for watching and goodbye.